Will the House please come to order and members kindly take their seats? We are coming back from a recess for the Healthcare Committee to hear the last latest amendment. So now member from Northfield will offer an amendment that was emailed to members by our first assistant clerk. The amendment will also has been posted on the House Overview webpage, and there are copies available at the front table. Member from Northfield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members will find that, in fact, it has no wording change whatsoever from the amendment I presented earlier this afternoon. The difference is that instead of being a strike all and saying, let's gather this information before acting, it says, let's gather this information so that we will have it available next year for further knowledge and data and review that is very specific to the items that are identified for protective actions in this bill. Madam Speaker, the information it's seeking is simple. It is basic core information on the specific essentials to identify the best efforts on the specifics that we will be passing today. We've chosen to move without it. I've urged that we look at it first. But if we are moving ahead now without it, we should at least be gathering these specific details that address what the bill is addressing. We won't get it without specifically asking for it, because pending bills and pending efforts at information gathering have not asked and are not focused on some of the very specifics that impact what we are outlining in this bill. It shouldn't wait. We should do it in conjunction with passing the bill. It's very easy, readily available information. In the few cases where it's not readily available, it can be easily augmented. It only requires the effort to the extent possible. It's not any sort of difficult or lengthy kind of evaluation. It'll inform us next year for ways to follow up, for best actions, for what we might want to do, even to adjust this year's work to make it better and to know what it is that the Vermont experience is. I think we all recognize this is an incredibly important subject. And I think the better we can work to get it right, the better off we'll all be. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I urge the body to adopt this amendment.
Member from Essex.
Madam Speaker, again, we'd like to thank the member from Northfield and also reiterate that we appreciate her highlighting the importance of data collection. Again, currently, the Vermont Department of Health, through a CDC grant, is working on a data linkage project, which includes this information. We will be receiving this information from them in the fall in their final report. After discussion, it was determined that we would not feel comfortable moving forward with this amendment based upon receiving no testimony whatsoever from any of the affected parties in it, such as the Department of Public Safety or the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, as well as suicide survivors that this calls for interviews. So on a vote of 8-1, we found this amendment unfavorable, and we would ask that the body please vote no.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the member from Northfield? Member from Northfield.
Madam Speaker, nothing pending with the Department of Health or Mental Health is looking to identify these specifics that are specific to the interventions that are proposed in this bill and that will be presumably going into place. To not pursue it now, to not have it directly next year, I think is unthinkable. And there is no reason to not move forward. Madam Speaker, I would request when the vote is taken, it be taken by roll.
The member from Northfield requests that when the vote is taken, it be taken by roll. Is the member sustained? The member is sustained. When the vote is taken, it will be taken by roll. The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the member from Northfield? Are you ready for the question? If so, will the clerk please commence to call the roll?
Andrews of Westford.
2 minutes. Okay. Will the House please come to order and members kindly take their seats? Will the House please come to order? I would like to remind members that we are in the middle of a roll call vote. Members and guests are prohibited from using computers, phones, or any type of an electronic device. Please refrain from the passing of notes and conversation during a roll call. When the clerk calls your name, please answer in a loud and clear voice so the clerk can accurately record your vote. The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the member from Northfield? Will the clerk please continue to call the roll?
Andriano of Orwell. Anthony of Berry City. Arison of Weathersfield. Arsenault of Williston. Austin of Colchester. Bartholomew of Heartland. Bartley of Fairfax. Beck of St. Johnsbury. Berbecco of Winooski. Byrong of Regents. Black of Essex. Bloomley of Burlington. Bongarts of Manchester. Boslin of Westminster. Boyden of Cambridge. Brady of Williston. Brannigan of Georgia. Brennan of Colchester. Brown of Richmond. Brownell of Pownell. Brumstead of Shelburne. Burdett of West Rutland. Burke of Brattleboro. Burroughs of West Windsor. Buss of Woodstock. Campbell of St. Johnsbury. Canfield of Fairhaven. Carpenter of Hyde Park. Carroll Bennington. Casey of Montpelier. Chapin of East Montpelier. Chase of Chester. Chase of Colchester. Chestnut Tantrum of Middletown Springs. Christie of Hartford. Chena of Burlington. Clifford of Rutland City. Coffey of Guilford. Cole of Hartford. Conlon of Cornwall. Corcoran of Bennington. Cordis of Lincoln. DeMar of Venusburg. Demro of Corinth. Dickinson of St. Albans Town. Dodge of Essex. Dolan of Essex Junction. Dolan of Waitsfield. Donahue of Northfield. Durfee of Shaftesbury. Elder of Starksboro. Emmons of Springfield. Farley's Rubio Barnett. Galfetti of Berrytown. Garifano of Essex. Goldman of Rockingham. Ghostland of Northfield. Graham of Williamstown. Granning of Jericho. Gregoire of Fairfield. Hengo of Berkshire. Harrison of Chittenden. Hedrick of Burlington. Higley of Lowell. Holcomb of Norwich. Hooper of Randolph. Hooper of Burlington. Houghton of Essex Junction. Howard of Rutland City. Hyman of South Burlington. James of Manchester. Jerome of Brandon. Kornheiser of Brattleboro. Krasnow of South Burlington. Labor of Morgan. LaBounty of Linden. Lally of Shelburne. Lalone of South Burlington. Lamont of Morristown. Lanford of Virgins. LaRush of Franklin. Levitt of Grand Isle. Lipsky of Stowe. Logan of Burlington. Long of Newfane. McGuire of Rutland City. Marcotte of Coventry. Maslin of Thetford. Matos of Milton. McCann of Montpelier. McCarthy of St. Albans City. McCoy of Pulteney. McFawn of Berrytown. McGill of Bridgeport. Mahaly of Calais. Minier of South Burlington. Morgan of Milton. Morris of Springfield. Morrissey of Bennington. Mrowicki of Putney. Mulvaney Stanek of Burlington. Nicole of Ludlow. Knott of Rutland City. Noyes of Woodgate. I'm sorry, Noyes of Woodgate. Thank you. Nugent of South Burlington. O'Brien of Tunbridge. Odie of Burlington. Oliver of Sheldon. Page of Newport City. Payala of Londonderry. Parsons of Newberry. Pat of Worcester. Pearl of Danville. Peterson of Clarendon. Pouch of Heinsberg. Priestley of Bradford. Rachelson of Burlington. Rice of Dorset. Roberts of Halifax. Samus of Castleton. Sackowitz of Randolph. Shy of Middlebury. Shaw of Pittsford. Sheldon of Middlebury. Sibilia of Dover. Sims of Craftsbury. Small of Winooski. Smith of Derby. Squirrel of Underhill. Stebbins of Burlington. Stevens of Waterbury. Stone of Burlington. Supernata Barnard. Taylor of Milton. Taylor of Colchester. Templeman of Brownington. Tolino of Brattleboro. Toof of St. Albans Town. Torrey of Moortown. I'm sorry, Torrey of Mount. Thank you. Troiano of Stannard. Walker of Swanton. Waters Evans of Charlotte. White of Bethel. Whitman of Bennington. Williams of Berry City. Williams of Granby. Wood of Waterbury. Or excuse me, Wilson of Linden, I'm sorry. Wilson of Linden. Thank you. Wood of Waterbury. Arison of Weathersfield. Bongert to Manchester. Chapin to East Montpelier. Cordes to Lincoln. Durfee of Shaftesbury. McCann Montpelier. Mulvaney Stanek of Burlington.
Member from Northfield.
Madam Speaker, may I explain my vote?
You may.
Madam Speaker, what are we afraid of finding? That we made a mistake with this bill? This is data we should have had and is easy to gather, if not before passing major new laws affecting constitutional rights, then why not for next year in order to refine and improve targeted responses and protect all Vermonters?
Members, please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yes, 42. Those voting no, 104. The nays have it, and you have declined to amend the bill. There being no further amendments, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 230, an act relating to implementing mechanisms to reduce suicide.
The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? Member from Halifax.
Madam Speaker, do you have a plan to harm yourself or to take your own life? If so, describe your plan. This is a question I've been asked. I've sat with loved ones who've been asked this question by a crisis counselor, and I hate this question. It's hard to describe why. Maybe because it's being read off a checklist and it feels cruel. Maybe it's because you want to say, are you kidding me? Do I look capable of planning? Maybe I hate this question because in order to be assessed like this in Vermont, you have to check into an ER and sit there for a night at the very least, waiting placement along everyone else who's in crisis that night. You have to put on a gown and give up your phone and pee in a cup and answer questions on a checklist while you're being monitored by a camera. Madam Speaker, we need to make it easier for any Vermonter to raise their hand and ask for help. And the other thing about this question that I don't like, you don't need a plan to be on the verge of suicide. You only need for the thoughts to be so bad that you've lost any hope in any other relief but the end. And you have to have access to lethal means. And study after study has shown that adding steps between distressed individuals and lethal means reduces suicide rates and gives more survivors of self-harm another opportunity to heal. I believe the committee has determined that this set of steps responds to a targeted need and is constitutional. I will vote yes.
The question is, shall the bill pass? Member from Linden.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, we heard 3 heartfelt stories from the courageous members of this body about suicide. I can't even imagine how difficult it must have been, and I hope I never do. The member from Essex told us a tragic story of her 23-year-old son who committed suicide with a handgun. We heard the member from Lincoln, who told us about 4 very close members of her family that committed suicide, 2 of them using firearms. The member from Northfield told us how she tried to commit suicide a number of times by traveling at a high rate of speed down the interstate with her eyes closed, but at the last moment opened her eyes to avoid what could have been a tragic outcome. Thankfully, she got the help to get her through this very tough time in her life and is here today. How unfortunate that we would have been if she succeeded, as she wouldn't be here today giving us very spirited debate as she's done so many times through her years serving in this body. I prayed last night for each of them that God will keep giving them strength to deal with these tragedies, and I want to thank them for sharing their stories. I grew up around guns, and I have a gun and have very fond memories of my dad and I going hunting. We've been debating whether this bill is unconstitutional. The member from Judiciary said his committee heard testimony from the state's attorney, and she said, I feel very comfortable if the constitutionality of this bill is challenged, I can defend it. We heard that other New England states have some very similar of these provisions in their constitution. I trust that the state's attorney is correct. Far be it for me to challenge her. A few years ago, the city of Montpelier voted for non-citizen voting and was challenged because of its unconstitutionality. In December 2022, the Vermont Supreme Court unanimously ruled that it was not unconstitutional. I'm sure this bill will be challenged in the court, and once again, we'll let them decide if this is unconstitutional. Will this bill eliminate suicides by firearms? Of course not. Do we need to look for other ways to bring the rate down? Of course we do. If this bill was enacted prior to 2018, would the member's son be alive today? Who knows? But I'm sure that she would have loved giving it a chance. I will be voting yes because I do not look at this bill as being unconstitutional, but as an inconvenience. You still have the right to have a firearm on your nightstand to protect your family from an intruder without a trigger guard, and your 16-year-old son or daughter can go hunting after school when you are not home, as long as they have your permission and pass the hunter safety course. This bill may be an inconvenience, but it is worth a little inconvenience if it saves just one life? I think so. Thank you.
The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? Member from Swanton.
Madam Speaker, these guns have always been here. They are not new. They are in our homes. We have grown up with them. The true question before us is why are Vermont's children of today using these at such a high rate, that is so horrific and in such a horrific manner? The guns have not changed. We have.
The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have passed the bill. Now we'll turn to House Bill 288, which is an act relating to liability for the sale of alcoholic beverages. Please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 288, an act relating to liability for the sale of alcoholic beverages.
Will the House please come to order? The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? Member from Rutland City.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. During yesterday's discussion of this bill on the floor, a question was raised in regards to reasonable and prudent person, what the definition of that would be. I did not have an answer readily on hand at that moment. I've since had the opportunity to talk to legal counsel. I apologize for not having the definition yesterday. Today is a very busy and full day, and I hate to think of how many members of this body lost sleep last night wondering about this. So to define, is used in H-288, the reasonable and prudent person in similar circumstances clause is borrowed from the common law standards for negligence claims. The language in subdivision A2 was borrowed directly from the Model Act, which is the Liquor Liability Act used by nearby states such as Maine, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. The prudent person standard is a component of common law negligence claims, which require a plaintiff to establish the following elements: the existence of a legal duty of care, the defendant's breach of that duty, the plaintiff's suffering of an injury, and proof that the defendant's actions caused the injury. Black's Law Dictionary defines prudent as a standard of carefulness, precaution, attentiveness, and good judgment as applied to action or conduct. The general statement of prudent under the common law is prudence is defined as a reasonable standard of judgment, management, and conduct under the circumstances based on what was known or should have been known at the time a decision was made or the action was completed. Prudence involves a duty of care to others. So hopefully as we finish off this very important bill to many longstanding Vermont businesses, that answers that standing question, and we're able to approve this and allow these Vermont businesses to get the insurance they need and continue to operate. Thank you.
The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have passed the bill. Members, next we will take up, we will remain in order with House Bill 473, 476, and 481. With that, House Bill 473 is an act relating to radiologist assistance. Please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H-473, an act relating to radiologist assistance.
The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have passed the bill. Up next is House Bill 476, which is an act relating to miscellaneous changes to law enforcement officer training laws. Please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H-476, an act relating to miscellaneous changes to law enforcement officer training laws.
The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have passed the bill. Next, we'll turn to House Bill 481, which is an act relating to public health initiatives to address death by suicide. The bill was introduced by the Committee on Healthcare, and the member from Burlington, Representative Chena, will speak for the committee. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H-481, an act relating to public health initiatives to address death by suicide.
Member from Burlington.
Madam Speaker, House Healthcare took extensive testimony on the issue of suicide this year, building on many years of work to prevent suicide. We heard about the progress of existing initiatives and about the plans for new approaches to address the public health issue that is suicide. In collaboration with the Department of Mental Health, your House Healthcare Committee drafted H-481 to support, coordinate, and expand public health initiatives to address death by suicide in Vermont. Section 1 adds to Title 18, the part of Vermont statutes pertaining to health, a new chapter 192 called Preventing Death by Suicide, in which we codify the duties of the Department of Mental Health's Director of Suicide Prevention, which include leading the state's suicide prevention efforts, intervention supports, and postvention efforts, and collaborate with communities and providers to reduce the number of suicide deaths and attempts in the state. Promoting and supporting statewide crisis and suicide prevention recommendations as outlined in the state's suicide platform, including the creation of a strategic plan and suicide prevention education protocol for all schools. Expanding partnerships, implementing innovative data-driven initiatives, coordinating suicide prevention programs across the state, and working to secure federal funding. Section 2 sets a deadline of July 1st, 2024 for the Director of Suicide Prevention, in collaboration with the Agency of Human Services and stakeholders, to submit a statewide strategic plan to the legislature for review, and requires quarterly updates between July 1st, 2023 and April 1st, 2024. This section also requires the statewide strategic plan to identify goals, possible partners, and strategies for meeting clearly defined targets in the prevention of suicide. Key resources and gaps shall be identified, including zero suicide program expansion, improved data collection and reporting to identify contributing causes, including social factors, to inform prevention strategies, data-informed systems and strategies for establishing and maintaining postvention services within communities, schools, and healthcare systems, sustainable 988 Lifeline funding, for which budget recommendations are due in January of 2024. Section 2 sets a deadline of January 15, 2024 for the Director of Suicide Prevention in collaboration with the Agency of Education and stakeholders to develop and submit a model protocol for all schools regarding suicide prevention, education, and postvention services. Section 3 sets a deadline of February 1st, 2024 for the Department of Health in collaboration with the Director of Suicide Prevention to present information to the legislature regarding the work accomplished by the state in accordance with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Comprehensive Suicide Prevention Grant, including the results of the Complete Suicide Data Linkage Project, which is examining the circumstances surrounding each death to determine social, behavioral, systems, and community-level factors that may increase the risk for suicide. As soon as results are available, we shall be informed. And Section 4 is the effective date of July 1st, 2023. Your House Healthcare Committee heard from witnesses, including Legislative Counsel, the Office of Legislative Counsel, Director of Suicide Prevention from the Department of Mental Health, Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Mental Health, Suicide Prevention Program Coordinator from the Vermont Department of Health, Public Health Analyst from the Vermont Department of Health, Research and Statistics Unit Chief from the Vermont Department of Health, Deputy Secretary from the Agency of Education, the Division Director of the Federal Education Support Programs from the Agency of Education, the Education Programs Manager from the Agency of Education, the Director of Child and Family Services from the Department of Mental Health, Pediatric Critical Care Specialist and member of the Child Fatality Review Board, University of Vermont Children's Hospital, Board Chair of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, Vermont Chapter, a mother from St. Jay, Vermont, a husband from Burlington, Vermont, a mother from Williston, Vermont, a parent from Essex, Vermont, and the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Health. Your committee vote on this bill was 901, and we ask for your support. I'm sorry I'm talking so fast, but we have a lot to do today. Thank you.
The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have ordered third reading. Next, members, we will go through House Bill 482, then 483, and then House Bill 126. With that, House Bill 482 is an act relating to Vermont Criminal Justice Council recommendations for law enforcement officer training. The bill was introduced by the Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. The member from Charlotte, Representative Waters Evans, will speak for the committee. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H482, an act relating to Vermont Criminal Justice Council recommendations for law enforcement officer training.
Member from Charlotte.
I think my voice is a little bit better today. Can you all hear me better? Madam Speaker, House Bill 482, which is available on the House Government Operations and Military Affairs webpage, is an act relating to Vermont Criminal Justice Council recommendations for law enforcement officer training. The acronym for this, which you will hear a bit of over the next few minutes, is VCJC. The bill proposes the following. First, sections 1 and 2 repeal the current statutorily required 4-hour minimum number of hours of fair and partial policing training, and instead will require training to demonstrate competency in fair and impartial policing. Second, section 3 will require a report back from the VCJC by January 15th, 2024 on the efforts and outcome of the new competency-based training. Section 4 repeals the requirement that all officers receive advanced roadside impaired driving enforcement training, which is also called ARIDE, requirements, and will allow the VCJC to determine which certified law enforcement officers need ARIDE training. Section 5 clarifies that law enforcement agencies are required to collect data for the date, time, and location of roadside stops, in addition to other statistics that are already captured and reported. Section 6 will require executive law enforcement officers during the hiring process to contact all of a law enforcement applicant's former law enforcement agencies of employment. Section 7 and 8 will extend the VCJC's deadline to adopt rules regarding alternate routes to law enforcement officer certification in anticipation of a 3-year plan to phase in alternate routes to certification. Section 9 is the effective date, which will be on passage. So current statute requires 4 hours of fair and impartial policing training every odd-numbered year. H482 will retain this biennial training requirement, but will require trainees to be evaluated based on competency in fair and impartial policing rather than just logging in the hours. Often when we learned through testimony that often when there's a time limit or a time requirement for training, that sometimes people will fast forward or put it on mute while they're doing the training if it's electronic, or that there's no other evaluation for whether they've actually learned the information, and instead it's just kind of paying lip service to that situation. So the testimony from the director of the VCJC and law enforcement agency leaders indicated that they're enthusiastic about this type of training and evaluation. Instead of a compulsory time period, sometimes referred to as check-the-box training, competency training will use a variety of evaluation methods to ensure that the curriculum has been absorbed and understood. The curriculum will be informed and certified by the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training, also known as IADLIST. I love an acronym. The bill includes a report back in the year 2024 to ensure that the competency evaluation program is running smoothly. The bill requires the VCJC to adopt the rules regarding alternate routes to certification on or before July 1st, 2025. Moving on to the next part, the ARIDE training teaches law enforcement officers to identify signs of impairment relating to drugs, alcohol, or both in motor vehicle operators. This change in ARIDE training requirements was recommended by the VCJC because many certified law enforcement officers do not do highway patrols, and the limited capacity to offer ARIDE training is already prioritized to offers who will use it in the course of their work. The data collection portion of this bill essentially puts into statute what most agencies are already doing, which is collecting roadside stop data. We heard that some agencies only report the data listed in the statute, leaving out the date, time, and location from their reporting. In instances of small communities, or rural towns with a limited number of houses on a road or other similar circumstances, it will be at the discretion of local law enforcement as to how specifically they publicly report this information. We are not making any changes to the Public Records Act in this bill. Current law only requires contact. This is moving on to the next section. Current law only requires contact with the last employer of a potential law enforcement officer. This bill will expand that requirement to all former law enforcement agency employers. Your House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs heard from many stakeholders and witnesses, including the president of the Windham County Sheriff's Office, the deputy state auditor from the state auditor's office, the lead training consultant from the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training, the deputy director of the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, legislative counsel from the Office of Legislative Counsel, the deputy director of IAD list, the chief of police from the St. Albans Police Department, the co-director of Fair and Impartial Policing and Community Affairs, the Department of Public Safety, the executive director of the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, the chair of the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, and the executive director of the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. The vote of the committee was 10-1-1, and we respectfully request your support.
The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and third reading is ordered. Up next is House Bill 483, which is an act relating to the accountability and oversight of approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition. Member from Cornwall.
Madam Speaker, I move we postpone action on H 483 until March 29th.
You have heard the motion. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have postponed action on House Bill 483 until next Wednesday. Now we'll turn to House Bill 126, which is an act relating to community resilience and biodiversity protection. The bill was referred to the Committee on Environment and Energy, which recommends that the bill be amended as printed in today's calendar. The member from Middlebury, Representative Sheldon, will speak for the committee. Carrying an appropriation. The bill was then referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which recommends that the report of the Committee on Environment and Energy be amended as printed in today's calendar. The member from Underhill, Representative Squirrel, will speak for that committee. Please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 126, an act relating to community resilience and biodiversity protection.
Member from Middlebury.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. H 126 is a strike-all amendment that can be found on page 1173 of today's calendar. For members who were here last session, you'll find this bill to be familiar to one that we passed last year. The Community Resilience and Biodiversity Protection Act sets a goal of conserving 30% of our lands by 2030 and 50% by 2050. It defines 3 categories of conserved lands and requires the Agency of Natural Resources to inventory and assess progress toward meeting the goals. It also requires the agency, along with a diverse array of stakeholders, to develop an actionable plan using Vermont conservation design as a guide to achieve the goals and make recommendations to the legislature for funding and programs that will ensure that we achieve the goals. Why conserve 30% of our lands by 2030 and 50% by 2050? The scientific community has coalesced around the critical importance of conserving 30% of the planet's land by 2030 and 50% by 2050 in order to protect and recover biodiversity and prevent against catastrophic climate change. Natural solutions such as land and water conservation are scientifically proven, cost-effective, and rapidly scalable strategies to store planet-warming carbon and protect the planet's life support systems. Currently, conservation organizations in the state estimate that approximately 24 to 26% of Vermont is permanently conserved from development and managed in a largely natural state. These lands include our working forest lands. To date, at least 70 nations around the planet have committed to 30 by 30 or similar targets. The Biden administration committed the United States to 30 by 30 in 2021. California, New York, Mexico have established their own goals, and many other states are actively following their lead. Madam Speaker, may I quote from Vermont Conservation Design webpage as well as the summary report?
You may.
Vermont Conservation Design is a landscape-level conservation guide to protecting and enhancing ecological function into the future. The lands and waters identified in this project are the areas of the state that are of highest priority for maintaining ecological integrity. Together, these lands comprise a connected landscape of large and intact forested habitat, healthy aquatic and riparian systems, and a full range of physical features, including bedrock, soils, elevation, slope, and aspect, on which plant and animal natural communities depend. When conserved or managed appropriately to retain or enhance ecological function, these lands will sustain Vermont's natural legacy into the future. An ecologically functional landscape contains all of the native species in Vermont and a full range of native habitats and natural communities known to occur in the state. An ecologically functional landscape is also resilient, allowing species to shift distribution and natural communities to rearrange themselves in response to a changing climate and other stressors. That last part was from the Vermont Conservation Design Summary Report. This bill is about making wise investments in climate adaptation and mitigation for both wild and human communities. It builds on the great conservation work and policies that are already ongoing in our state to ensure that we conserve the necessary elements of our landscape before they and the invaluable services they provide for our communities are lost to development. Conserving an adequate amount of undeveloped land is one of the simplest ways we can address the climate change and biodiversity loss. Having an intact and connected landscape of natural and working lands will mitigate the effects of flooding on our towns and villages. It will reduce the impacts of drought by reducing the risk of fire and increasing aquifer recharge. It will protect biodiversity by providing habitats and allowing for the migration of species, both north and uphill in the face of a warming climate. It will improve our shared air and water quality, ultimately leading to improved public health outcomes for Vermonters. Additionally, conserving an intact and connected landscape will benefit our economy in the short and long term. Open space and access to the outdoors are the foundations of our lifestyle and the Vermont brand, and are essential to our natural and working lands and outdoor recreation economies. Conserving these spaces will also reduce the significant economic impacts from climate stressors like increased flooding and prolonged drought, and help reverse biodiversity loss and land conservation, which economists estimate costs the global economy several $1 trillion annually. Finally, H126 will ensure that the Vermont we know and love today is here for our children, grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. There are 5 sections in the bill. Section 1 is the title, Community Resilience and Biodiversity Protection Act. Section 2 are the findings. There are a lot of findings. I'm not going to read them all, but suffice it to say that the findings are, they indicate the need for this bill and this type of conservation in the United States and around the world. They explain the role of Vermont and the incredible opportunity that we have to play a key role in conserving biodiversity regionally in our country. And they also reflect an overwhelming interest, not surprisingly, of Vermonters in this topic, and a strong interest in participating in the process. So to begin, So it's worth saying, the reason we need the bill is that nature is facing a catastrophic loss of biodiversity, both globally and locally. In addition to its intrinsic value, biodiversity is essential to human survival. According to the United Nations, 1 million species of plants and animals are threatened with extinction. And I do need to add here that in Vermont, we have 1,000 species of concern listed, meaning they're at risk also. Human activity has altered 75% of the Earth's surface. The health of ecosystems on which humans and all other species depend is deteriorating rapidly, affecting the very foundation of our economies, livelihoods, and food security, and our quality of life. The primary causes are changes in land and sea use, direct exploitation of organisms, climate change, pollution, invasive species. In 2017, the Forest Action Plan found fragmentation and parcelization represent major threats to forest productivity and exacerbate impacts to climate. The 2021 climate assessment highlights an increase in extreme weather events and recommends nature-based solutions as a proven low-cost strategy to address them. The initial Vermont Climate Action Plan calls for investing in strategic conservation and to increase the pace of permanent conservation towards 30 by 30 targets, with Vermont conservation design guiding the priorities. This is where we go to the regional impact. The Nature Conservancy has developed the Resilient and Connected Landscapes project and found Vermont plays a key role in conservation of biodiversity regionally. The Staying Connected initiative is an international partnership, and its goal is to maintain, enhance, and restore landscape connectivity. They've identified 9 important linkages. 6 of those are in our state. The Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife works with the Agency of Natural Resources and Vermont conservation organizations to develop Vermont conservation design. It is intended as a framework to sustain the state's ecologically functional landscape into the future. Intact and connected ecosystems support Vermont biodiversity, reducing flood risks and mitigating drought and sequestering carbon. Our most effective, efficient contribution to conserving diversity and maintaining a landscape resilient to climate change is to conserve this landscape. In order to maintain the ecological functions, the full range of conservation approaches is needed, including supporting private landowners' landowner education, technical assistance and programs, and conservation easements that promote sustainable forest management, and conservation easements, fee acquisition. This next one is a nod towards the need for human habitat, if you will. The Vermont Housing Finance Agency 2020 Housing Needs Assessment projected an urgent need pre-pandemic for new housing. Strategic investments in conservation is consistent with construction of housing in Vermont's villages and centers. The 2 goals are not mutually exclusive, rather they're complementary. Finally, the lands and waters, forests and farms and ecosystems. This is a land acknowledgement, the last one. The lands and waters, forests and farms and ecosystems in natural communities in Vermont are the traditional unceded home of the Abenaki people. Access to land and land-based enterprises has excluded Black, Indigenous, and persons of color Vermonters and others from historically marginalized and disadvantaged communities in the centuries of European settlement. Efforts to increase land conservation must also include opportunities to increase access to land and land-based enterprises for Indigenous people and all who come from historically marginalized and disadvantaged communities. Section 3 are the definitions. It includes 3 types of conservation area that will be used to meet the conservation goals: ecological reserve area, biodiversity conservation area, and natural resource management area. These are presented in order of least to most managed lands. There's also a definition for sustainable forest management as well as conserved. The first 3 definitions, the types of conserved areas, are derived from the United States Geological Survey Gap Analysis Project, which manages the species, land cover, and protected areas database in the United States. The definition of sustainable forest management came from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and was suggested to us to use by Agency of Natural Resources. The definition of conserved came from the bill that's passed last year. Section 2802, Conservation Vision and Goals. This is a new section that's a result of testimony we received this year. It's the vision of the state of Vermont to maintain an ecologically functional landscape that sustains biodiversity, maintains landscape connectivity, promotes climate resilience, supports working farms and forests, provides opportunities for recreation and appreciation of the natural world, and supports the historic settlement pattern of compact villages surrounded by rural lands and natural areas. Subsection B of this section establishes the state goals of conserving 30% of Vermont's total land area by 2030 and 50% by 2050. It directs the Secretary of A&R to lead the effort. Subsection C requires that the conservation goals shall be met with a mix of conservation categories defined in this chapter, and shall be guided by conservation science and the conservation targets within Vermont conservation design, prioritizing ecological reserve areas to protect highest priority natural communities and maintain or restore old forests. It's important to note here that prioritizing ecological reserve areas for the conservation of highest priority natural communities and old forests does not take away from the other types of conservation contemplated in this bill, which, by the way, will be the majority of the conservation that would take place should a plan be implemented. Rather, these are called out for the highest level of conservation because of their importance to conserving biodiversity and in recognition that we've done the least amount of work, conservation work, in this area. 2803, the Conserved Lands Inventory. This section requires the Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources to create an inventory with assistance from the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. An inventory of Vermont's conserved lands and policies by July 1, 2024. The inventory shall include a review of the conservation categories in section 2801 of this chapter and suggestions for modifications or additions to them, the amount of conserved land in each category, and the other conserved lands in the state. A summary of all the conservation practices available to assist landowners in land conservation, an assessment of how lands will be used to increase ecological reserve areas, the implementation methods that could be utilized to achieve the conservation goals, an assessment of how water is protected in the state and how protection of aquatic systems may be addressed in the plan. And I want to state here that water in the state of Vermont is a public trust and is already considered protected. And so the international and national conservation goals include lands and waters, but we are actually unsure of how we include that, given the fact that the lands or the waters of the state already belong to the people of the state of Vermont. So we're including it. We're having the agency give us some more insight on that. How existing programs, the inventory will also include how existing programs will be used to meet the goals and any new programs that might be needed to meet the goals. An assessment of existing funding sources and recommendations for new sources that will be needed to meet the goals. And an equity assessment of existing land protection conservation strategies and programs. And finally, an evaluation of opportunities related to intergenerational transfer trends. Section 2804 is the conservation plan. This section requires the Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources to create a conservation plan to meet the goals of 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 by December 31st, 2025. The plan shall include a comprehensive strategy for achieving the goals of this title, the implementation methods for achieving the vision and goals of the chapter, and recommendations to increase equitable access to protected and conserved lands and land-based enterprises. In developing the plan, the Secretary, with assistance from the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, shall hold 12 or more public meetings on the plan between July 1st, 2023 and December 31st, 2025 to solicit input from stakeholders. Stakeholders shall include private owners of forested land and agricultural lands, land trusts, conservation organizations, environmental organizations, working lands enterprises, outdoor recreation groups and businesses, indigenous groups, and representatives from historically marginalized and disadvantaged communities, municipalities, regional planning commissions, conservation commissions, and relevant state and federal agencies. At least 3 of the meetings shall be designed to solicit comments from the general public. It requires the inventory to be updated annually and to track progress toward the goals. It's important to note here that the Vermont Housing Conservation Board took note of our work last year on the previous bill, and they convened their conservation partners to begin to consider what an inventory and planning process might look like in the face of anticipating significant federal funding opportunities to use and recognizing the fact that we would still need this prioritized conservation planning process in order for us to make the most of these significant funding opportunities. Section 5 is the effective date. This bill takes effect on passage. Madam Speaker, Vermont has done better than most states managing and restoring our lands and waters. However, the United States Forest Service estimates that we're currently 74% forested, a reduction from a high of about 80% as recently as 2007, and that 10 to 14,000 acres of forest land are being developed annually. At this rate, an area approximately the size of the Green Mountain National Forest could be lost to development by 2050. Conserving an intact and connected landscape has a multitude of diverse benefits for all of us. Planning for conservation is necessary for the future of biodiversity in the region, to ensure human and natural community adaptation to a changing climate, to mitigate the effects of the climate and biodiversity crises, to support our forest products industry, our recreation and tourism economy, and our outstanding quality of life. Currently, demand for conservation dollars far exceeds the availability of funding to help landowners who want to conserve their land. Establishing conservation goals with the guidance of ANR's Vermont Conservation Design and developing a plan with diverse stakeholders will ensure that we focus our conservation efforts in the areas of greatest need before they are lost forever. Your House Committee on Environment and Energy heard from 33 witnesses. We heard from the Lands and Habitat Manager at the Department of Fish and Wildlife, backcountry hunting and anglers, a consultant from the Joint Fiscal Office, the Executive Director of the Wyndham Regional Commission, Legislative Council, Office of Legislative Counsel, a professor from Tufts University, a representative from Pinnacle Outdoor Group, the General Counsel and Forest and Wildlife Program Director from the Vermont Natural Resources Council, and also a representative of the Forest Partnership, the Interim Commissioner from the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, the Executive Director of the Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission, a consulting forester with Northwoods Forestry, a conservation planner at the Department of Fish and Wildlife, citizen of the Elnu Abenaki tribe, the chair of the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs, the director of public policy and advocacy with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, a lobbyist with the Vermont Forest Products Association, a representative from Lincoln Farm Timber Harvesting, the president of the Vermont Ski Areas Association, a manager for the United Nations Nature for Development Global Program, the Director of Planning and Program Development at the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources, the Director of Government Relations and Policy at the Nature Conservancy of Vermont, the Director of Policy and Government, Agriculture, Climate, and Land Use Policy Manager at the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, the Policy Director for the Farm Bureau, the Vermont Farm Bureau, Vermont Center, representative of the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, the founder / president of Pale Morning Media, the executive director of the Northeast Vermont Development Association, the executive director of the Northeast Wilderness Trust, an ecologist who is retired from the Agency of Natural Resources and one of the authors of the original Vermont Conservation Design, actually two of them, the private lands program manager at the Vermont Forest, Parks and Recreation, the director of Lands Administration and Recreation at the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, and an ecologist with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. The committee vote was 9-0, and we ask for your support.
And now for the Committee on Appropriations, member from Underhill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the House Environment and Energy Committee for working with our House Appropriations Committee to help us understand H126 and for helping us craft an amendment related to Section 4 appropriations. Language can be found on page 1178 of today's calendar. Our amendment strikes the second sentence of section 4 and leaves the first sentence, which is, the sum of $75,000 is appropriated from the general fund to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board in fiscal year 2024 to support public education and outreach to inform the development of a statewide conservation plan. The vote of the House Appropriations Committee on its amendment was favorable, 12-0-0. The vote of your House Appropriations Committee on House 126 as amended by House Environment Energy and further amended by House Appropriations was favorable, 8-4. Thank you.
Member from Middlebury.
Your Committee on Environment and Energy did a straw poll vote and found the amendment favorable, 9-0.
The question is, shall the report of the Committee on Environment and Energy be amended as recommended by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for the question? If so, member from Clarendon.
Yes, Madam Speaker. May I question the member from Appropriations?
The member from Underhill is interrogated.
Yes, Madam Speaker. I'm confused as to what sentence is coming out.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm confused as to what this amendment does. We're striking out the second sentence of section 4. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, there are two sentences in section 4 of the appropriations section. The first section I read to you. The second section was more prescriptive about certain expenses to be paid by VHCB for public participation in public meetings. We felt that the scope of that was outside of the normal standard process that we go through in appropriations and looking at what I call work groups and commissions and per diems. We certainly think and believe conceptually that this is a good thing to be doing when we do this outreach and engagement, but feel that there needs to be a policy conversation about how we work with that within the construct of budgets and the amount of monies that we appropriate.
Okay, so the money is staying in, but what it's being used for is not.
That's correct. I think there's a strong feeling in our committee, and we have a strong vote, 12-0-0, that we believe that VHCB has been and will continue to be good stewards of the money that we give to them.
Thank you.
Member from Granby.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. May I interrogate the presenter of the bill?
Member from Granby, we are on the appropriations amendment. So is that, okay, yep, we'll get you on the next. So the question is, shall the report of the Committee on Environment and Energy be amended as recommended by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for the question? If member from Poultney.
I apologize, I'm just getting in, but may I inquire of the presenter of the amendment?
The member from Underhill is interrogated.
So I know the amendment, if I'm looking at it correctly, you're deleting the second sentence of section 4, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and the vote out of committee on that was 12-0?
12-0-0, that's correct.
12-0-0, okay. And then is that the only thing you voted on, or did you vote on the entire bill?
8-4.
8-4, thank you.
The question is, shall the report of the Committee on Environment and Energy be amended as recommended by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended the report of the Committee on Environment and Energy Now the member from Shaftesbury and others offer an amendment that is printed in today's calendar. Member from Shaftesbury.
Madam Speaker, the Committee on Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry spent some time reviewing and taking testimony on H126. Our interest was in better understanding the bill's implications for the state's working forest and farmlands and the Vermonters who work and maintain them. Our committee did not have formal possession of the bill, but individual members of the committee are pleased to offer this amendment. The text can be found on page 1179 of today's calendar and includes 3 brief instances of amendment. The first instance acknowledges, in a new finding in section 2, the ongoing work of the Forest Future Roadmap process that began in 2022, and the relationship between managed forests, conservation, and the role of the forest economy. The second instance of amendment is in section 3 of the bill, in language that addresses modifications or additions to the 3 conservation categories defined earlier. The amendment provides that changes would not be limited to the inventory phase, but would also be possible during the planning process, reflecting input collected from the public and stakeholders. Third, to acknowledge the role of conserved farms and working forests in the state's long-term conservation strategy, as well as the landowners who steward them, 2 changes are offered in section 2804B, highlighting ongoing efforts and commitments to protect working lands and other significant areas. We appreciate the time given us by the Environment and Energy Committee to hear our amendment and ask for your support.
Member from Middlebury.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The House Environment and Energy Committee really wants to acknowledge the time that our Agriculture and Food Resiliency Committee took in scrutinizing the bill and very much appreciates the suggested changes. And on a straw poll vote of 10-1, we found this amendment to be favorable.
Now the question is, shall the report of the Committee on Environment and Energy be amended as offered by the member from Shaftesbury and others? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended the report of the Committee on Environment and Energy. Now the question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Member from Granby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I interrogate the presenter of the bill?
The member from Middlebury is interrogated.
Yes, thank you. Much of Essex County lands are already in some form of conservation or current use. Some towns have as much as 50% classified as such. In lieu of property taxes, these landowners, whether it be state, government, or private landowners, pay a much less amount. Does the plan request include this information and will take into consideration as these towns have much revenue loss from towns that already struggle with all the other burdens put upon them with other taxes?
What's the question?
The question is, does the plan request that's going to be asked of a group to consider the fact that there are already lands, 50% in some of these towns that are paying less in taxes, and will they take that into consideration when they make their plan, that these towns need some form of compensation to make up for that lost revenue?
Thank you for the question. I think I'm hearing 2 questions, actually. I want to address the maybe the unequal distribution of conserved lands throughout the state. I mean, one of the goals of Vermont conservation design is to make sure that we are conserving the right amount of lands in each of the 9 biophysical regions that exist throughout our state. And we had a lot of discussion about this in committee. And you are indeed correct. There are some communities that have significant amounts of conserved land already in them, and there are other regions of the state that have a lot less. And the vision is to kind of rebalance that to make sure that we're protecting all of the different types of natural communities within the different biophysical regions. Additionally, we did look at percentages of conserved lands by state with a consultant who works with our joint fiscal office, and she gave us lots of great information about the different tax rates as relates to amount of conserved lands in different towns. And interestingly, tax rates in towns with more conserved lands are significant, or they're notably lower. I have, if the member's interested, I can share that information with you offline. The other interesting piece of the data that was brought to us is that towns that have larger populations of people tend to have higher tax rates than the ones with fewer people and more conserved lands.
Madam Speaker and member, I thank you for doing that research and taking that into consideration. Thank you.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Member from Craftsbury.
Madam Speaker, some folks argue that forests should be entirely set aside in wildland reserves. Others argue that there are good reasons for humans to actively manage forests. I tend to think that that's a false dichotomy. I think most Vermonters want an array of different things from forests: clean water, clean air, forest products, recreation activities, wildlife habitat. And I think most people believe that we're in the midst of a dire housing crisis and that we need to add housing. I appreciate how this bill strikes a careful balance between the various uses and benefits of different land use practices. This bill sets aside 3 categories for conservation, inventories, the different types of conservation that are already in place, and then it creates a plan for how we can get there, balancing all of those different things that we want from our landscape. I'll be supporting this bill because it recognizes that sustainable, active forest management can complement protected area-based approach, and that strategic investment in conservation is consistent with the construction of housing in Vermont's villages and town centers. I urge the body to support this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Member from Clarendon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I interrogate the reporter of the bill?
The member from Middlebury is interrogated.
What percentage of our land right now, go back. If we take all the national forest, national federal lands, municipal lands, state lands all together, how much is that? Do we know? What percentage? How much is important? It's the percentage of land.
We know that it's approximately 24 to 26%. Well, the conserved lands are.
Okay. And is that land considered conserved land?
Yes.
Okay, so that's our base. And then we must have some land and land trusts that add up to something more?
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't have the number broken down. That would be all of the lands. It's approximate, which is why we need the inventory. But there's been some preliminary work done. In totality, it is 24 to 26%, including land trust lands.
Okay, all right. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
So land that isn't part of that is private land, privately held. How is that conserved? What's the standard of conserving the rest of it?
Privately held lands that are conserved would typically, I think, have a conservation easement on them.
Is current use land considered conserved?
Not under the definition in this bill. It's not, no, it's not conserved land unless it has a permanent conservation easement on it.
Okay, so we're at 20, high 20s% of land. In, what year is it now? In 27 years, we've got to find a way to double that almost. How is that going to be accomplished? I'm not understanding how we accomplish that if we assume that the federal government's not going to buy more land, although maybe they will, I don't know, that municipalities that struggle keeping people, keeping the roads clean and keeping schools open won't be buying more land. And I don't think we're going to buy that much more land. How is that, the rest of that land conserved under the definition you have for conserved?
Madam Speaker, the bill calls for an inventory, so we get a specific number on what lands, how much land we have conserved, and then the difference. And it also calls for the development of a plan for us to figure out how to conserve it.
Would you repeat that, please?
Sure. The bill sets up a two-step process. The first is to inventory the amount of conserved lands we already have, more specifically than we know today. And the second step is to write a plan for us to understand how we're going to meet the goals that are established in this bill.
Okay, so I happen to own 100 acres of land. I have a house, my house on it. Would they look at my property and say, well, you know, are you going to conserve it? Would they come to me and ask me if I plan to conserve the land? How would it work? I'm trying to get at how we go from 20-something to 50-something.
Madam Speaker, all land conservation transactions in the state of Vermont are voluntary. And right now we have more demand, if you will, from landowners who want to conserve their land than we have capacity to conserve. So part of the goal of this process is to be strategic in how we're spending those conservation dollars. If your land perhaps has a very important natural community on it, you may already be aware of that because one of our many conservation groups that are already proactively conserving lands might have been in touch with you.
Do you foresee the state or federal, well, probably the state, I guess, because it's our plan here, coming to property owners and engaging property owners in discussions about whether or not they want to conserve some or all of their land? Would that happen?
Madam Speaker, that's already happening today.
Say that again.
That is already happening today. The state of Vermont has a program to do that.
Madam Speaker, on page 1176, B at the top of the page, it talks about the percentages. And it concerns me greatly when I see the first sentence under there, the end of the sentence says, and 50% of the state's total land area shall be conserved by 2050. It doesn't say it could be, it may be, it says it shall be. And I can't get past that word. When we have shall in a sentence, in the military it was said you will, okay? It's the same, we shall. How are we going to, if we've got 20-some-odd% of our federal, state, municipal lands conserved, how are we going to get the 50% when it says we shall do it without somehow pressuring, coercing, or taking private land? And that's my concern. I just want to hear the plan, I guess, in that regard.
The plan has yet to be developed, Madam Speaker, and there is in no way an intention to change the current long-established practice in the state of Vermont of working only with willing landowners to conserve their lands.
Okay. Can you tell me what's driving this plan? What, when I look in the bill and I look what I see here, I see definitions, I see findings, but I don't see a purpose. What's driven this? Why are we doing this now? I guess is my question.
We're doing, thank you, Madam Speaker. We're doing this now because we know we're losing, according to the U.S. Forest Service, 10 to 14,000 acres a year of our forested landscape to development, and that if we don't, they're not making any more land. So if we don't start now, we'll lose the opportunity.
Can you help me out with what development we're losing it to? Because I sure don't see it in the Rutland area.
You don't see it in the, excuse me, I couldn't hear you. What area?
I don't see the amount of development. I don't see anywhere close to 14,000 acres a year disappearing, unless it's the solar panels.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, the data comes from the U.S. Forest Service. There are different estimates of how much land we're losing annually to development, but it's significant and it's adding up, and we're losing opportunities to conserve the most important pieces of our landscape.
Thank you.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Member from Lowell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I inquire of the presenter of the bill?
The member from Middlebury is interrogated.
Member, approximately how many acres are forested in Vermont?
How many acres of forest land are in Vermont?
Yes.
4.5 million acres, I believe.
And that's what, is there a percentage there as well?
Well, there's 6 million acres in the state. There's 74% of the lands are forested in the state of Vermont. That's the number that the U.S. Forest Service has given us.
Thank you for that. You had also mentioned this new forest study that talks about 10 to 14,000 acres a year are being lost to some form of development. I'd like to elaborate a little bit more on that. And I believe there was a UVM study only 6 years ago that there was around 15 to 1,700 acres of loss. Can you explain the large increase in just the past 6 years?
I'm not actually sure where that UVM number comes from, member.
Well, I guess, and the previous member had mentioned it as well. Do you know if the forest survey that you used does include wind projects or solar panel development?
I don't, but it does say that it's convert annually to non-forest.
And I guess, another question I've got is looking under section 2, your findings, number 13, it talks about the need and assessment for urgent pre-pandemic need for housing, which we all understand. But then it talks about strategic investments in conservation is consistent with construction of housing in Vermont's villages and town centers. Is this really a bill to tie up through conservation rural lands and only basically eventually allow people to move into the urban areas?
No, Madam Speaker, I don't see it that way. As noted, 74% of our landscape is currently forested. That doesn't include other important lands that are not counted as forest lands that are also in natural vegetated state, like wetlands and open areas and riparian areas. So I think that given the fact that significantly more of our landscape is undeveloped and forested today, we could still meet this goal with willing landowners, and other landowners will still do as they see fit with their land. Thank
you, member. I guess that's all the questions I've got. Madam Madam Speaker, again, I'm going to elaborate a little bit. The previous member tried to get some information as to how the Secretary of Natural Resources will achieve these goals, conserving state, federal, municipal, and private lands. I had mentioned this last year as well as far as private lands. It was said that this would be voluntary. There's some efforts around conservation through deed restrictions and so on, voluntarily. Again, I had mentioned last year, and I believe it is a concern, as you can even see more recently with some of the changes being looked at with Act 250, but there's more than one way to get an individual who owns property to relinquish that property one way or another. And one of the big ones in my mind is property taxes. And what we do down here has a very large effect on people's property taxes. And when they get to the point where they can't afford those property taxes anymore, especially if they're not in current use. And I know a lot of folks up my way who are farmers who do not have it in current use, and that's their prerogative, but they're paying a huge amount of taxes. And we continue to increase that property tax, whether it's through the education tax or even our own town taxes. And that's something we definitely need to consider. The other thing is zoning. I mean, some towns already have very restrictive zonings. And that's another effort. I mean, I know of 2 people currently, and this is through wetlands mitigation, had purchased a piece of property, had a environmentalist come in that does that work and delineate wetlands after the fact, and was told that the individual could not do anything with that land. So again, there's efforts out there that are making it difficult for folks as it is. And I certainly see this as, it doesn't, again, we're tasking the Agency of Natural Resources with a huge effort in these so-called goals. And I think it's going to be devastating to the Vermont forest products industry. And I think it's going to be devastating for folks that do want to live in a rural environment. And I'm certainly one of those. Thank you.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Member from Granby.
Yes, thank you. I would like to ask another question of the reporter of the bill, if I may.
The member from Middlebury is interrogated.
Does the 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 include lands that are used up by solar panels and wind towers, or is that a whole other bunch of land? A whole separate amount of land?
I don't think that they would meet the definition of conserved under this bill.
So will that mean usable land for development, farms and forests shrink even more?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Will that mean that our usable land for development, farms and forest shrink even more?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
If we conserve 50% of our land, plus we have solar panels and wind towers that take up another whole chunk of land, does that mean that our usable land for development, farms and forest shrink even more? We lose more land because of the 3 combined.
This bill would conserve forest lands that would be working forest lands. This bill wouldn't conserve them, it would identify them. It would make a plan for conserving lands.
Okay, thank you.
Member from Newberry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I interrogate the presenter?
The member from Middlebury is interrogated.
Thank you. I'm just curious, are there any counties in the state that are actually meeting this goal already? Or do you have a breakdown of that?
Oh, I believe that there probably are. I don't have that in front of me. We haven't done an inventory. That's part of the point of the bill.
But there probably are, you said?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
You said there probably are.
Yes, we looked at town by town. We looked at how much conserved lands there were in the answer I gave previously. I mentioned that. So we didn't look specifically at the county level, but there are, our conserved lands are not distributed evenly across the landscape.
Okay. The members that touched on this earlier, the payment in lieu of taxes program. Has that changed through the years? If we're going to be conserving more land, obviously that payment in lieu of taxes is going to go up, I would imagine. Has that percentage of the cost, have the towns been getting the same amount through the years, or has that gone up?
Madam Speaker, we did hear from a consultant who works with the Joint Fiscal Office, and she did educate us on the different programs between the state and federal lands, the PILT and the pilot, but I confess that I am not an expert in the history of the payment in lieu of taxes that the state, pays the towns.
Okay. You had mentioned that it takes a full range of approaches to reach this goal of use of the lands and their type of protections. Did geographic diversity come into that?
As I previously mentioned, one of the real main reasons that we need the inventory and the planning process is that we know our Vermont conservation design is really framed around the 9 biophysical regions in the state, and that our conservation efforts have not necessarily been representative of the different natural communities that exist within those biophysical regions. And so the inventory is going to really help us understand where we need to put greater effort into our conservation work in order to conserve biodiversity.
Okay. It sounds like we're not going to be using our lands that are in the current use program in this equation. How do we consider them now before this bill passes? How are we considering those lands as conserved? Like, what do they fall under?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Madam Speaker. Could you rephrase it?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of jumbled it myself. So you had said current use, land that is in current use right now won't count towards this 30 for 30. Is that correct?
Well, if it's not permanently conserved, it won't. It would not count toward meeting the goals.
Well, do we consider it conserved land right now?
No, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure different people have different opinions on that.
We don't consider it conserved land now?
I'm not sure who we would be, but
The state, do we
no,
look at that as conserved
it's not.
land?
It's not in the calculation of conserved lands that I mentioned earlier.
Okay. Well, thank you, member. I have a pretty rural area myself, as I'm sure many others do. And reading through this, as was mentioned, there's already towns that are fulfilling this. And those towns are concerned that they're just going to be asked to pick up more of the pie here. When we're looking for more land to conserve, it's going to be in their areas, not the others. We enjoy living in rural areas and conserving our land. That's why we do it. We don't do it to just be a playground for somebody else.
Member from Stowe.
Madam Speaker, may I ask a question of the Speaker?
Are you asking to interrogate the member?
Negative. I'm asking if I can ask you a question of
Is this a point of inquiry?
protocol or
Why don't we try a point of inquiry and see where it goes?
Madam Speaker, I would like to make a point of inquiry.
You may.
Is this the second reading of the bill that I'm understanding as amended?
Yes, the question at hand is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? If you vote if the body votes yes, the next question will be, shall the bill be read a third time?
And thank you, Madam Speaker. If it is voted to be read a third time, will members be able to interrogate the presenters of the bill?
If we vote to amend the bill and then move on to the question of shall the bill be read a third time, you can interrogate during that question as well.
That would be not today, but another day.
We will be taking votes on this tomorrow as well.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, may I interrogate the presenter, please?
The member from Middlebury is interrogated.
Thank you. I have a number of questions, but I would like to help the presenter of the bill to explain some unanswered questions. And I bring with my answers some of the unanswered questions, if I may do my best, from frankly my over 50 years of working in conservation and earning a living as a logger.
Member from Heartland, what is your point of order?
The member is saying he would like to provide answers as part of an interrogation. That's not the purpose of an interrogation.
Member from Heartland, I find your point of order well taken. Member from Stowe, this is an interrogation that was requested, so at this point in time, please ask your questions of the member from Middlebury. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When you first made opening remarks about House 126, I tried to write fast. I'm not writing, but I heard a list of many agencies, departments, land organizations, but I only heard you mention a forester. So one question is, were there more than any other than that one forester who testified before your committee?
Madam Speaker, did we hear from more than one forester? Is that the question?
Correct.
I believe we did, yes.
Do you know how many
I
consulting foresters that testified before your committee?
I would say 3 were specific that I'll say 3.
Thank you. And I heard the name Lincoln Farm Harvesting testified. How many actual loggers who do make a living harvesting timber testified before your committee?
I believe you've identified the one that I know of.
So the answer is there was one timber harvester who testified before your committee?
Yeah, Madam Speaker, we did reach out broadly to the members of the industry, and we heard from witnesses I would characterize as very solid representatives of different wood foresters and forest managers, but we did not get a broad response to our request for witnesses.
Well, that's a little sad to me, because I know there are approximately 175 licensed consulting foresters in this state, and there may be more that might work for other agencies. And there are approximately 200 of us who identify and as professional logging contractors or loggers. Do you, and we all primarily work in what's called the Northern Hardwood Forest Type, one of 47 forest types in the United States. Does the presenter know how many loggers were reached out to testify of those 200 Vermont loggers that we know exist?
Madam Speaker, we made requests, and I believe the members committee made similar requests.
Thank you. I'd like to inquire as to, of the approximately, let's say, 15,700 landowners that are registered in the use value appraisal program, also known as current use, of those 15,000 who have not conserved land by the definition of House Bill 126, how many of those 15,000 testified?
Madam Speaker, I don't know the land ownership status of the witnesses that came into committee. I can say anecdotally that this was a bill that garnered a surprising amount of interest in my email box of landowners who were supportive and interested.
So do I gather that you don't know how many landowners actually came in to testify?
I don't.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. This is the...
Member, what is your point of order?
This is the second time that I've heard a question that has been asked and answered be asked again.
Member from Burlington, I find your point of order not well taken, but I would advise the member, please stand. I would advise the member to please, I think your question has been answered, and please move on to another question for.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I guess I was just trying to get clarification. I apologize. So, is not to take up the body's time anymore today. I will try to prepare specific questions at my next opportunity. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Member from, help me out here, Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I interrogate the presenter of the bill?
The member from Middlebury is interrogated.
Member, earlier in your discussion, you mentioned that it was 78% and the forest volume decreased to 74%. Can you tell me where the 4% was developed? What counties?
I can't. As I mentioned, it's a U.S. Forest Service publication, Forests of Vermont 2020, that I was referencing specifically today.
I live in the Northeast Kingdom. And there is many thousands of acres of land there, some federal, some state, some private. Those private landowners who are in current use utilize the sources of intelligence in the woods to conserve the land through our state foresters, county foresters, who come in and inspect your land. And if it has had harvest done by commercial or the landowner himself, that land is all reported to the state for taxation purposes and volume of harvest services. Your state foresters are very responsible. They do not allow the rape of the land. So that land is conserved by the state to start with. So I'm concerned about the definitions of conserved land versus current use land. Current use implies that it's going to be conserved. I own 200 acres of land. I've been in current use on.
Member from Winooski, what is your point of order?
Madam Speaker, I don't hear a question from the member.
It is coming. I already gave one question, and it cannot be answered.
Member, please sit down. Member from Winooski, I'm very close to calling your point of order well taken. It sounds like there is a question coming, so I am waiting to hear that question coming very soon, or there will most likely be, we'll be right back here.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, member. Member from Morgan.
Thank you. So let's summarize this. Has the committee engaged in a process for the plan that you want to develop to engage more landowners? I didn't get a notice.
Madam Speaker, the planning process is not underway yet. And I will happily reiterate the stakeholders who are listed as important to the planning process. Stakeholders shall include private owners of forested lands and agricultural lands, land trusts, conservation organizations. That may, I hope, satisfy the member. The first stakeholders listed are private owners of forested lands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Are you ready for the question? Member from Franklin.
Madam Speaker, may I interrogate the presenter?
The member from Middlebury is interrogated.
Under section 2801, your definition section, number 1, ecological reserve area. And may I read from that?
You may.
Means an area having permanent protection from conversion of natural land cover, and that is managed to maintain a natural state within which natural ecological processes and disturbance events are allowed to proceed with minimum interference. Does that mean that you're going to allow wildfire to burn on these areas?
I couldn't hear the very end of the question, Madam Speaker. Can you repeat it?
Is your intent to not suppress wildfire?
My intent, the intent would be, this land would be managed the way that the owner of the land currently managed it, similar to the way a wilderness area would be managed.
Well, historically, correct me if I'm wrong, historically, the primary disturbance that went across the landscape of the state of Vermont was wildfire, lightning strikes and other fires that started. And that's what maintained the ecological diversity and characteristics of the native forest before we came here. So are you going to suppress fire?
I would add to your list wind throw. I think wind is a very significant disturbance in the forest. And the organizations that I know who hold lands that would be in this category today do manage for the, for wildfire. It is allowed to be managed for.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, may I make a comment?
You may. You have the floor.
My concern with setting 30 and 50% goals is that, we have many species that have conservation needs within the state of Vermont. And just setting some arbitrary number doesn't mean, and if you just head blindly towards those goals, then you won't necessarily achieve the proper conservation of those species that we have of need. So I'm concerned about that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Member from Barrytown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Did the committee, may I interrogate the witness or the presenter of the bill?
The member from Middlebury is interrogated.
Did the committee take any testimony regarding the dubious practice of importing biomass to meet Vermont's so-called renewable energy needs?
We did not, Madam Speaker.
Did the committee consider the impacts of invasive organisms on Vermont forests by importing biomass?
We did not take testimony on the importation of biomass.
Am I to understand then that the plan of the act is to deforest the rest of the United States and keep Vermont conserved?
Madam Speaker, the planning process that is stood up in this bill, and the conservation goals that more importantly are stood up in this bill, I think the vast majority of the lands would be actively managed timberlands that would provide locally sourced wood for our Vermont economy.
But the state of Vermont currently imports biomass already.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. We didn't take testimony on that.
So there was no testimony regarding the supply and demand of Vermont's needs for wood as it stands or as it will stand in the future?
There was not.
Thank you, member. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Member from Stowe.
Madam Speaker, while you were out of the room, I ended my interrogation of the presenter of House 126, but I did not take advantage of the closing statement because I didn't want to burden this body. But do I have permission from you to make a fairly brief statement?
Members, member, you do. You can speak. If you got up a third time, you would have to ask permission of the body, but this is your second time, so you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just would like to try to bring some context to what the working forest is in Vermont. And I've worked in Vermont forests since 1968. I've worked in Pennsylvania forests, Massachusetts, New York State, New Hampshire. But there's been a major evolution and rapid change. And rapid, by what I mean is when I started logging, there were 500 and some sawmills in the state of Vermont. We currently identify 16 sawmills left. And I'm sure there were a lot more than 200 loggers back then. But one of the most acute things that's happened since the 1970s was a broader understanding of forest ecology, the fragility and values that come from our forests, our working forests. Those include water quality, and that's a high responsibility today, maintaining sustainable and productive forest soils, maintaining habitat for all types of wildlife, but in particular, songbirds and other migratory birds, creating and maintaining productive habitat for those. Additionally, recreation uses we have gone from a logging and farming state in the first 180 years to more of a mixed-use state with many factors contributing to our economy and putting pressures on our forests. There's an additional value that in the last 10 years, as a logger, I've taken great responsibility toward understanding and managing, and that is the value of the carbon pool. Forests in New England, particularly the northern hardwood forest type, which most of our state resides in, is the most resilient forest type of the 47 forest types in the United States. By that I mean it's the most diversified, which includes biodiversity, diversity of species compositions, age compositions, and a great ability to add in for greenhouse gas protection and other climate change. Our forest pool, which is the collective system of forest sequestration, forest storage, and that occurs above ground in live trees, in dead trees, below ground in root systems and lower portions of stumps, as well as the forest litter that creates and keeps our soils moist. And these responsibilities in the 21st century have been enacted by the state of Vermont into not just good best management practices, but a higher level of acceptable management practices, which require, it's not optional to open up a log job or a landing. You have to install, maintain all during your harvest and at closeout, all of these measures which protect the resources, particularly water quality. So I will look forward to tomorrow and maybe have the opportunity to dig deeper into what it means. I serve on the Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry Committee, and we've taken an incredible amount of very impactful testimony on how the agricultural sector is struggling. The organic agricultural section is struggling. But I'm going to give a little insight why maybe there aren't many loggers that felt comfortable coming in here. They're a tough, sort of independent bunch. They've never been considered high on the social strata, and I'm proud to be one of them. Every logger I know gets up before dawn, goes out in the woods, and does his trade. It's the most dangerous profession in North America. And they don't always come home at night, but they do it every day. They've been doing it their whole life. And I don't know any of them that have a 401k, retirement plan, or expect to do anything but work till their body gives out. So when we as a body enact a plan, and I am all for conservation plans, been a conservationist my whole adult life, but we better take into consideration the impact. The reason these people don't come in, they're not necessarily whining, but our forest working folks are about as vulnerable to sustainability as any segment of our population. So I'll just leave those thoughts as we move forward to your call for vote and for tomorrow's third reading. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Are you member from Manchester?
Madam Speaker, the committee actually agrees with what the member, the soliloquy that the member just delivered. And it's very important to keep in mind that the largest category here is a category of land that is going to be conserved for the purpose of forest management. We are going to become, and it's already happening, a climate haven for people all across the country. We are losing the equivalent. One way to think about those 10 to 15,000 acres is 10 to 15,000 football fields of forest land every year. If that trend continues, there will be less and less land available for any of the three categories we're trying to conserve here today. We're talking about conserving today. The point is to conserve land across all 9 regions, all over Vermont, northern Vermont, middle Vermont, southern Vermont, and at different elevations in order to achieve and maintain the opportunity for biodiversity, but also for all of the, most importantly, our most significantly, the largest category being those lands that are actively managed. Much of the land in current use and under active management now is also actually permanently conserved. So there is zero conflict between the notion of conserving land and the forest products industry. And in fact, the point of this bill in large measure is to make sure that that industry can thrive going forward. And so while we have current use is I think one way to put it is temporarily conserved. The point here is permanent conservation that actually ensures that Vermont, as we know it now and as we want to maintain it, will be here 20, 30, 100 years from now, because if we don't do it, it's not going to be. Thank you.
Member from Northfield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I inquire the presenter of the bill, please?
The member from Middlebury is interrogated.
When you took your testimony, were you figuring in the amount of acreage that are listed in town forests already?
Madam Speaker, the inventory lands number, or the conserved lands number that we have, I believe is based on, it's the product of Trust for Public Lands and other conservation organizations in the state working together to sort of to calculate how much lands there were, and they do include municipal town forests.
I didn't quite get that. Did you say that did include town forests?
I believe it does include town forests, yes.
Thank you.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Are you ready for the question? Member from St. Albans.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I request that when this vote is taken by roll.
The member from St. Albans Town requests that when the vote is taken, it be taken by roll. Is the member sustained? The member is sustained. When the vote is taken, it will be taken by roll. Are you ready for the question? Member from Clarendon.
Yes, Madam Speaker, and I spoke to the amendment on appropriations. I also spoke once. I don't know if I have to ask permission for a third time. If I do, I'm asking that permission.
No, member, it is on each question, so you are good to
go.
stand.
Okay. May I question the reporter of the bill, please?
The member for Middlebury is interrogated.
I continue to be hung up on the acreage that is being bandied about here, the yearly acreage of forest that we lose to development. Could you specify that again, please, what that number is?
It's a range, and it gets calculated, I believe, every year. And it is in this most recent document that I have before me, 649 acres of forest land converted annually to non-forest. It also includes a number of 3,439 acres of non-forest reverting back to forest. So it ranges from the numbers I've seen, 10 to 14 a year, approximately.
So the total number was? 14,000?
In this document that we have for the 2020 data is 12,649.
All right, so we'll go with 12,000. So every year, what we're saying is, every year we lose 12,000 acres to development. Now, is there a when we say development, what do we mean? Does that mean homes, a housing development? Does it mean an industrial park? Could it mean a clear cut by a logger? Could it mean a solar array? What are we talking about? Do you know?
Madam Speaker, I would need to get back to you with more of the specifics. There's certainly a lot of information that's available from this. The first two numbers I read to you, it's an annual Forest Service survey of the forests in Vermont.
Okay, and is this through aerial photos? Is that what determines it?
I actually think that it might be plots. Field data calculated using the USDA Forest Service Forest Bioinventory Analysis Annualized Sample Design.
Okay, I didn't quite get that. Aerial photo?
No, field data.
Field data, okay. Okay, so at 12,000 acres a year, that's 60,000 acres in 5 years that we lose the development. Okay, thank you, member. I just refuse to believe that that number is accurate. And then I know nothing. I'm just a guy, but 60,000 acres lost to development. It seems to me if that was actually the case, that we wouldn't have a housing problem. I can't envision 60,000 acres in 5 years lost to development in the state we're in. Thank you.
Member from Dover.
Madam Speaker, one of the things I really love about serving in this body, and that I have loved about serving in this body, is the passion that many members of this body bring for our working lands. Having been on the Rural Caucus for a number of years, we were fortunate enough to do a tour, an educational summer throughout Vermont, talking with loggers, going to logging sites, sawmills, folks that do wood production. And it is really clear the passion and the stress that is out there in our working lands, in our forests, and obviously with our farmers. This has been a new journey for me this year, Madam Speaker. I have not been on a committee of jurisdiction looking at these types of conservation bills. And I shared many of the concerns that I've heard today, that we could not and should not be making it harder for those who are working our land, those who are making sure that we have timber for the homes that we so desperately need to build, those working to ensure our utilities, providing some baseload power in Vermont, are functioning. These are really critical issues that we need to keep an eye on. What I learned as part of this process and with this bill, this is a plan. We are looking at how can we as a state make sure that we preserve as much life, as many species that exist here as possible. This is what I've learned. In order to do that, we need to try and preserve some of our land. I was really worried when we looked at this, and probably drove my chair a little crazy going over and over, that we might be taking or really forcing people to take up their land. And I've really come to understand that is not what's happening in this bill. This bill is defining for us key parts of our lands that we need to preserve, key types, in different areas of our state, all areas of our state, taking into consideration what is already permanently conserved and telling us what is now permanently conserved and how much more we need to conserve. There exists in the state of Vermont right now programs for folks who have their farms, have standing forests that are getting ready to sell their land or their farm, and there are conservation programs that will purchase those lands at the time of sale. That's a lot of what is happening here. In order for us to understand how to be ready when someone may want to conserve a piece of land, we really need to do this mapping. So that's what's happening in this bill. And it's been quite a journey for me. I appreciate the work that the committee has done to really acknowledge in this bill the importance of the working lands, and also that we need housing. And there are other human species that need to live here as well. So again, I really appreciate how rich this conversation always is in this body because of the experience that folks bring. And I would encourage the body to vote for this.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, the clerk shall commence to call the roll.
Andrews, of Westford.
2 minutes. Will the House please come to order and members kindly take their seats? Will the House please come to order? I would like to remind members that we are in the middle of a roll call vote. Members and guests are prohibited from using computers, phones, or any type of an electronic device. Please refrain from the passing of notes and conversation during a roll call. When the clerk calls your name, please answer in a loud and clear voice so the clerk can accurately record your vote. The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Environment and Energy as amended? Will the clerk please continue to call the roll?
Andriano of Orwell. Anthony of Berry City. Yes. Arison of Weathersfield. Yes. Arsenault of Williston. Yes. Austin of Colchester. Yes. Bartholomew of Heartland. Yes. Bartley of Fairfax. Yes. Beck of St. Johnsbury. Yes. Berbecco of Winooski. Yes. Byrong of Virgins. Yes. Black of Essex. Yes. Bloomley of Burlington. Yes. Baumgarts of Manchester. Yes. Boslin of Westminster. Yes. Boyden of Cambridge. Yes. Brady of Williston. Yes. Brannigan of Georgia. No. Brennan of Colchester. No. Brown of Richmond. Yes. Brownell of Pownell. Yes. Brumstead of Shelburne. Yes. Burdett of West Rutland. No. Burke of Brattleboro. Yes. Burrows of West Windsor. Yes. Buss of Woodstock. Yes. Campbell of St. Johnsbury. Canfield of Fairhaven. Carpenter of Hyde Park. Yes. Carroll Bennington. Yes. Casey of Montpelier. Yes. Chapin of East Montpelier. Yes. Chase of Chester. Yes. Chase of Colchester. Yes. Chestnut Tangerman of Middletown Springs. Yes. Christie of Hartford. Yes. Chena of Burlington. Yes. Clifford of Rutland City. Coffee of Guilford. Yes. Cole of Hartford. Yes. Conlon of Cornwall. Yes. Corcoran of Bennington. Yes. Cordes of Lincoln. Yes. DeMar of Enosburg. Yes. Demrow of Corinth. Yes. Dickinson of St. Albans Town. No. Dodge of Essex. Yes. Dolan of Essex Junction. Yes. Dolan of Waitsfield. Yes. Donahue of Northfield. Yes. Durfee of Shaftesbury. Yes. Elder of Starksboro. Yes. Emmons of Springfield. Yes. Farley's Rubio Barnett. Yes. Galfetti of Berrytown. Garifano of Essex. Yes. Goldman of Rockingham. Yes. Ghostland of Northfield. No. Graham of Williamstown. No. Granning of Jericho. Yes. Gregoire of Fairfield. No. Hango of Berkshire. No. Harrison of Chittenden. No. Hedrick of Burlington. Yes. Higley of Lowell. No. Holcomb of Norwich. Yes. Hooper of Randolph. Yes. Hooper of Burlington. Yes. Houghton of Essex Junction. Yes. Howard of Rutland City. Yes. Hyman of South Burlington. Yes. James of Manchester. Yes. Jerome of Brandon. Yes. Kornheiser of Brattleboro. Yes. Krasnow of South Burlington. Yes. Labor of Morgan. No. LaBounty of Linden. Yes. Lally of Shelburne. Yes. Lalone of South Burlington. Yes. Lamont of Morristown. Lanford of Virgins. Yes. LaRush of Franklin. No. Levitt of Grand Isle. Yes. Lipsky of Stowe. No. Logan of Burlington. Yes. Long of Newfane. Yes. McGuire of Rutland City. No. Marcotte of Coventry. Maslin of Thetford. Yes. Matos of Milton. No. McCann of Montpelier. McCarthy, St. Albans City. Yes. McCoy of Poultney. McFawn of Berrytown. McGill of Bridport. Mahaly of Calais. Minier of South Burlington. Morgan of Milton. Morse of Springfield. Morrissey of Bennington. Mrowicki of Putney. Mulvaney Stanek of Burlington. McColl of Ludlow. Knott of Rutland City. Noyes of Wolcott. Nugent of South Burlington. O'Brien of Tunbridge. Odie of Burlington. Oliver of Sheldon. Page of Newport City. Payala of Londonderry. Parsons of Newberry. Pat of Worcester. Pearl of Danville. Peterson of Clarendon. Pouch of Heinsberg. Priestley of Bradford. Rachelson of Burlington. Rice of Dorset. Roberts of Halifax. Samus of Castleton. Sackwitz of Randolph. Shy of Middlebury. Shaw of Pittsford. Sheldon of Middlebury. Sibilia of Dover. Sims of Craftsbury. Small of Winooski. Smith of Derby. Squirrel of Underhill. Stebbins of Burlington. Stevens of Waterbury. Stone of Burlington. Supernon of Barnard. Taylor of Milton. Taylor of Colchester. Templeman of Brownington. Toledo of Brattleboro. Tooth of St. Albans Town. Torrey of Moortown. Troiano of Stannard. Walker of Swanton. Waters Evans of Charlotte. White of Bethel. Whitman of Bennington. Williams of Berry City. Williams of Granby. Williams of Granby. Wilson of Linden. Wood of Waterbury. Andriano of Orwell. Campbell of St. Johnsbury. Marcotte of Coventry. McCann Montpelier. Mulvaney Stanek of Burlington. Stevens of Waterbury. Templeman of Brownington.
For purpose of explanation, member from Burlington.
Madam Speaker, there is at least one thing that we all have in common. We love Vermont. I am proud to support H126, which will aid us greatly as we balance ourselves with our green hills and silver waters.
Member for Manchester.
Madam Speaker, may I explain my vote?
You may.
I voted yes in favor of H126 because it sets the table for Vermonters to collaboratively identify through a science-based approach how and where we want to grow and how and where we want to preserve our state for future generations.
Please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yes, 108. Those voting no, 36. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill. Now the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and third reading is ordered. Members, at this time, we are going to take a dinner break. It is 5:30, so we will be back here at 6 sharp. The first bill that we take up will be House Bill 66. So with that, the House will stand in recess until the fall of the gavel at 6 p.m.